Stargate Voyager.
All right, let's talk about the big news of the last couple days. The news of this alleged discovery regarding one of the Great Pyramids of Giza. Like I mentioned, if you saw it a couple days ago on social media, if this alleged discovery holds up, it will not only be one of the greatest discoveries of our lifetimes, but it will confirm what many others have been saying for years, if not decades, that there is a hidden history that the powers that be do not want us to know about. They don't want us to think about. They don't want us to talk about. So if you're watching this, you've probably heard the news, but if you were living on a Mars colony or living under a rock, or if you just came off life support, thank God, here's the news. So on March 16th of this month, 2025, at a conference in Italy, a team that has dubbed themselves the Khafre Research Team, led by a professor named Filippo Biondi, I believe, they released their findings from their research regarding what they call the Khafre Research Project. And what they revealed was that by using a new technology called SARS, that stands for Synthetic Aperture Radar Scans, that they had discovered never before seen structures, not only inside the so-called Khafre Pyramid, but underneath it as well. Now, this Khafre Pyramid is the center pyramid located in the middle of the three great pyramids of Giza. And it's the second largest of the Great Pyramids, standing approximately 450 feet tall. And it's attributed to a pharaoh known as Khafre. He was a dynastic Egyptian king who ruled in the 4th dynasty about circa 2500 BC. Khafre was the son of Pharaoh Khufu, who's credited with building the granddaddy of them all, the Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest one. And I'll circle back to this in a little bit on this subject of who supposedly built these pyramids. But for now, we'll go with their mainstream names of Khufu and Khafre. In this instance, we're talking about the Khafre Pyramid, the second largest middle one. Now, this Khafre Research Team obtained this data using an entirely new and non-invasive technique via satellite-based technology. So this was an independent project where no permits or permission was needed from the Egyptian government or the Ministry of Antiquities, which is probably why so many of them seem to be quite angry over this alleged discovery. And we'll get to more on that in just a little bit. Now, this groundbreaking SARS technology has apparently recently been prior used to scan volcanoes. But this guy, Filippo Biondi, the lead professor, scientist of the group, he adapted this technology to use with archaeology. And basically, it's this radar signal being sent and received that looks at multiple angles to get a 3D image of structures. And so it's using sound waves. And they scan deep inside and under the pyramids, and then they create 3D models based on what these scans show. Okay, so let's not bury the lead anymore. Let's get to these alleged major discoveries. So this team alleges that the tomographic images obtained from the satellite data processing highlighted the presence of 5 structures located at the center of the Khafre Pyramid that appear very similar to the so-called King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. Now, if these 5 chambers were all that they had alleged to find, it would still be the biggest news in the world right now. Because right now, as far as we know, there's really only 2 main chambers that are supposed to exist in the Khafre Middle Pyramid. There is what's called the upper chamber, located kind of just above where you would enter this pyramid, kind of down by the ground level. And then you have the lower chamber, which I believe, if my memory serves me right, is subterranean, just under the ground level, and these two chambers are connected by this long passageway. The point is, though, if you Google map of the Khafre Pyramid, you're going to see this giant pyramid with these two tiny chambers way down near the very bottom, if not under the pyramid. So I've wondered before, what else is hidden inside the other 95% space that make up this massive 450-foot tall pyramid when you only have these two tiny chambers way down here. So it's not shocking to me at all if there are 5 other massive structures or chambers located kind of in the center of this pyramid. But the news that is rocking and shocking the world right now is their alleged discovery of these 8 massive cylindrical-like structures that run in pairs and descend down to a depth of approximately 2,000 feet below the pyramid. And then they connect into these 2 colossal squared chambers that measure 260 feet by 260 feet. So these 8 cylindrical vertical shafts extend into these cubic chambers. They pass through them. And then here's the mind-blowing part. They supposedly continue descending thousands of more feet, at least 3,000 plus more feet, down below, where other structures are apparently buried, almost as if there's an entire city buried 3,000 to 4,000 feet down underneath the Great Pyramids. So as you can imagine, this news has been met with all kinds of emotions across the stratosphere, across the internet and social media. You've got people that are excited, people skeptical, people outright angry. You've got masses of people that I think are excited about this and the potential for what could be if this is legitimate. You've also got lots of people that are skeptical about this alleged discovery. And I think they're skeptical for a couple of reasons. One of them is that, when you see these 3D renderings or these images, they're almost unbelievable when you look at the scale of how huge these structures would be if they're real. And you look at how they're cylindrical, and then that there's almost like cylindrical tubing wrapped around them. It looks mechanical. So if you're not familiar with Christopher Dunn's theories that the Great Pyramids are like ancient energy plants that we'll get into in a little bit, then yeah, your mind is just blown by these images. I think other people are skeptical because they've had a hard time finding the original sources of this information, and kind of because of the rollout of the information. The information related to these discoveries was essentially shared at this conference that happened March 15th and 16th in Italy, where this team, I believe, was presenting. But instead of coming out themselves to the microphones and cameras and, presenting these images and their scientific papers, it sounds like they basically just told everybody present, feel free to release this information as you want to. And the only guy that apparently took them serious, at least that day, was a guy named Trevor Grassi, who's actually a Facebook friend of mine. And he's done an amazing job of pumping out all of this information. But he originally posted this on his Facebook page, I believe on March 16th or shortly after. And this research team has also designated someone known as Nicole Ciccolo or Ciccolo, I believe. She's a YouTuber, and so she's put out some videos sharing some of this official information. But according to Johanna James, who's put out some great videos on this as well, she's basically said these are the 2 main sources, at least in her recent video I watched. So again, people were kind of skeptical about how this information was released, but even more, there might be skepticism based on the method used to find these supposed structures. And as Trevor pointed out in his interview with Johanna, he said the proof of their method is the key thing here. And he's convinced that they're going to prove their method, these scientists with the Khafre Research Project. For example, that if they can scan a chamber that we know already exists in one of these pyramids, and then show that their imagery with the SARS technology matches, then we know the method works. I thought Trevor put it perfectly when he said that. And so they basically need to do a proof of method. The point is, had they started with that, there might be way less skeptics right now. Again, then you've got people that are just outright angry over this. And I've seen this on social media with some of the stuff I've posted. You know, when people just start calling names and belittling you and just outright freaking out, manifesting over this. But even some mainstream people getting angry. Zahi Hawass, he's probably the most famous Egyptologist in the world. He once led the Ministry of Antiquity there in Egypt. And he came out with a blazing statement the other day, slamming the alleged discovery as fake news and calling the scientists a group of amateurs. And he said this, quote, "All this information is completely wrong and has absolutely no scientific basis. They used techniques that are not approved nor validated," end quote. And he actually said even more than this in his statement, but those are the parts that got my attention. He said it's completely wrong, has no scientific basis, and the techniques are not approved nor validated. Now, keep in mind, this is the same guy who has spent a career, decades, telling us with a straight face that the Great Pyramids are just tombs. So if Zahi is coming out swinging this hard, emphatically saying these kind of statements, it kind of gets my wheels spinning a little bit. It kind of gets the critical side of my brain moving a little bit and going, is somebody over the target here a little bit? Again, that was Zahi Hawass saying that, the most mainstream person you could find regarding the mainstream version of history and ancient Egypt. But then we've got guys like Christopher Dunn, who's on the other side of the spectrum, who would be considered one of the leading alternative history researchers, a retired aerospace engineer who wrote some incredible books on ancient Egypt, like the Giza power plant, which is one of my favorite books. And Chris has spent decades researching the Great Pyramids and making countless visits there. And again, he's pulling on his experience as an aerospace engineer. But I thought it was important to point out what he stated in a minute. But I want to set it up by, again, if you haven't heard of him, letting you know that he believes that the Great Pyramids of Egypt were sophisticated, ancient generators of clean energy, that they served to stimulate the release and collection of what's called electrons in the Earth's crust by harmonizing seismic energy. And one of the proofs that Chris points to in his books regarding this theory are these scorch marks that you can see inside the Great Pyramid in the so-called Grand Gallery. When you look up inside this incredible trapezoidal passageway, every so often on the left and right side, you see these scorch marks. And Chris believes this supports the King's Chamber explosion hypothesis. What's that mean? Well, the King's Chamber is considered, the most important part of the Great Pyramid. Guys like Zahi Hawass would have us believe that this was just the room where the pharaoh was buried. However, we have no record of any confirmed discoveries of mummies or sarcophaguses being pulled out of any of the Great Pyramids. And when you walk in this so-called King's Chamber, you see this perfectly squared room with these incredibly massive 70-ton, I believe, granite ceiling beams above you. And inside, the center back of this chamber is, again, what they call the sarcophagus, but it doesn't look like the other dynastic Egyptian sarcophaguses that are usually kind of got this curved human-like shape. This is just a rectangle box, pieces of it blown off on the side. So the King's Chamber explosion hypothesis is that if this was an energy generator of sorts, producing energy, there was an explosion inside in ages past. which might explain why this box appears to have been damaged. One piece looks blown off one side. And then when you look up inside the king's chamber, you can see that there was a massive seismic event inside. It was moved off its core by some massive explosion. There's these gigantic cracks in the corners of the building and in the massive granite ceiling beams that the dynastic Egyptians, I believe, and even later peoples came in and basically put mortar in there to fill in these gaps and hold it together. So all that to say, Christopher Dunn, one of the sages of alternative history for the pyramids, stated this, quote, "My initial impressions are that if the reported scan data and analysis are correct, this would be a major discovery and a validation of my own theories. The CAD drawings seem to represent a massive Tesla-like electromagnetic earthquake machine. But even without the CAD, I believe there is enough in the scans to warrant further investigation. If it turns out to be fictional, it's a more compelling and interesting fiction than the pyramids as tombs theory we have been taught. If it is proven to be fact, we could be on the threshold of a bright and harmonious future." End quote. I absolutely love the part Chris said there about if it turns out to be fictional, it's a more compelling and interesting fiction than the pyramids as tombs theory we have been taught. Well said. You know, I really like Chris's perspective on this, and I feel like this is kind of where I land on the whole spectrum of these alleged discoveries. So just a little bit more information for you regarding this Khafre Research Team and these guys heading it up. There's two guys really, it seems like. Professor Corrado Malagna, he's a tenured researcher, or was, at the Department of Chemistry at the University of Pisa from 1987 to 2017. And he's had publications of over 60 articles in international scientific journals in the field of chemistry. So if you know anything about ancient Egypt, you know chemistry is a vital part to trying to uncover the enigmas of ancient Egypt. In fact, the old word for Egypt is Kemet, and that's basically where we get this word chemistry. So this guy is the chemist, but then the other guy, Professor Filippo Biondi, this guy has a bachelor's degree in information engineering, master's degree in telecommunications engineering, a PhD in telecommunications engineering, a master's degree in space engineering, another master's degree in quantum optics. So this is the guy focused on the synthetic aperture radar, or the SAR tech, and basically he's been working on this patented technique which enables the observation of these material interiors using acoustic information extracted from satellite radar data, also known as Doppler tomography. So these guys are no slouches. I'm not somebody that usually gets impressed by somebody's credentials and accolades and education, but man, when I read Biondi's accolades here, I can't help but get a little bit impressed here. I mean, among other things, PhD in telecommunications engineering, master's degree in space engineering, master's degree in quantum optics. Again, the point is these guys are no slouches. So I think that's important to point out. All right, so as I begin to wrap this up, it's also important to note that this isn't the first time the world has heard of Biondi and Malagna. In 2022, they came out with a controversial study. And this study, this research, focused on analyzing the internal structure of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which revealed numerous structures, corridors, rooms, both above and below the ground level, using this SARS technology. So this 22 research paper also showed the same void in the Great Pyramid that the Scan Pyramid Project found, apparently. And that was the last kind of big discovery regarding these Great Pyramids of Giza. You probably heard about the void, the void in the Great Pyramid. Their research showed the void as well, and these like 20 other structures that apparently nobody knew existed inside the Great Pyramid. Now, while the Ministry of Antiquities in Egypt went with the void discovery by the Pyramid Scan Project, they didn't really reference what these guys found in their 22 study. And the mainstream media didn't really report it either, which is might be why you've never heard of their 2022 study. But according to Trevor Grossi, again, he's the original source for this latest alleged discovery. He believes this might be why this Khafre project team went about releasing the information the way they have, kind of in this sensational release with these colorful 3D images, because now the whole world's watching. Now the whole world is waiting for more on the edge of their seat. One more note on their 2022 research regarding the scans of the Great Pyramid. Skeptics also point to when you look at their scans and their overlays. For example, they'll show an image of the Great Pyramid and then they'll overlay their scan on top of it. And they'll say, as you can see, our scan caught the right side wall of the Great Pyramid. Skeptics will also point out that, for example, like the left side, if my memory serves me right, you can see the Great Pyramid underneath the overlay, but their scan doesn't really pick up the left side. So the skeptics say, if this is such great technology, why don't we just clearly see this triangle? All right, so what's next with this incredible alleged discovery? According to Trevor Grossi, or Grossi, sorry, Trevor, if I'm not pronouncing your last name right, he's the original source. According to him, in his video with Johanna James, which I'll link below, he mentions that there's a press conference coming imminently, that we will be getting complete confirmation of everything we are seeing within these images within 10 days. So Trevor is very confident that what we are seeing is legit. These are real discoveries, and that this team is going to do whatever they have to do to convince the doubters, and that they're going to confirm these images within 10 days. And he said that about a day or two ago, so we're less than 10 days as of this recording. According to Trevor, an official paper, a scientific paper, is also coming. And he even said something else I found fascinating, basically that this team has discoveries and scans of all these Great Pyramids, more discoveries that they're sitting on, but they're just releasing these ones now of the Khafre Pyramid. Another thing to point out is Hugh Newman and Andrew Cullen's video they recently put out on megalithomania. I'll try to link that too. Great video. At the beginning, they talk about some of this, and they break down how we have video proof already of an extensive cave system beneath Giza that was discovered in 2008, apparently by Andrew Collins himself. And they believe that whatever is beneath Khafre, according to these alleged discoveries, is likely linked to this cave system. And Andrew points out in the video how the ancient name for Giza, the Giza Plateau, is Rastau, which basically translates as the entrance to the caves. And I don't think that all of these are even natural caves. I believe these are megalithic prehistoric tunnels that were created by the same engineers of the pyramids. And my tour guides have told me the same. You talk to even guards on the Giza Plateau, they know of all kinds of secret entrances that lead down into massive megalithic shaped tunnels that run under Giza. Of course, most of these are sealed off, and your everyday tourist can't just go explore them. All right, my final thoughts here, I promise. Back to Khafre and Khufu. These are the guys that get credited with building these pyramids to be tombs for themselves. Again, the mainstream narrative tells us that these great pyramids were just tombs, and they were built by basically a massive slave army that used hammers and chisels and sleds and ramps and ropes and built scaffolding, and where they propped up these megaton blocks The blocks on the outside of the pyramid made of limestone are approximately 2 tons each. So that alone would be hard. But what about the granite 70-ton blocks inside these great pyramids? How would you just prop that up and pull it and push it? Well, that's the theory that we've been led to believe, right? What if the dynastic Egyptians like Khufu and Khafre found these incredible superstructures, knowing they did not build them, but they claimed them as their own, wrote their initials on them, and said, I want to be buried in this someday. Because as I've stated on other podcasts of mine and elsewhere, I've been into these great pyramids multiple times. And when you go in there with an open mind, this thing feels like a machine. Nothing about it at all feels like this was originally built to be a tomb for a pharaoh. What I mean is this: when you're inside the Great Pyramid, for example, if you're going down the 300-foot passageway that descends down to the basement underneath the pyramid where the subterranean chamber is, when you're in this passageway or any of the passageways that connect you to the big chambers, you can't stand straight up, upright. You have to bend over because it's like 4 feet high max, or maybe a little bit higher, but you can't stand up straight, which is very uncomfortable when you're traveling slowly 300 feet down this long vertical passageway. You're bent over. So imagine that. You're bent over, hunched over. And it's hard enough doing this with, for example, a little backpack on your back while you're holding on to the wooden railings that they've put in there in modern times and the wooden steps they've put in there. It's hard enough just to get down and up. How would the ancients have done it with no wooden stairs and no wooden railings to hold on to? What's more, how would they do it if there was a giant funeral procession heading up and down these chambers, carrying large sarcophaguses and relics? And having been in the Valley of the Kings, which is like 8 hours away by car, south of the pyramids, where we know there was confirmed Egyptian mummies and sarcophaguses pulled out of there, the Great Pyramids look nothing like what you see in the Valley of the Kings. The Great Pyramids are just these dark, megalithic, colorless structures, right? Where it feels like these passageways weren't meant for humans. They were actually meant to be like maintenance shafts for some machine or thing to go down to clean out or connect to the chambers. But when you're at the tunnels in the Valley of the Kings, at least the dynastic Egyptian tunnels, it feels like, yeah, this was a tomb where there was pharaohs buried. You see the hieroglyphs and the color and the painted depictions. But again, you see none of that in the Great Pyramids. According to the archaeological record, we know the dynastic Egyptians had copper chisels and hammers. They might have had some iron too, and even bronze, which is a little bit harder. But the point is, all of those materials rank about a 3 to a 5 on the Mohs scale of hardness, with diamond being a 10. But these inner chambers of the Great Pyramids, like the so-called King's Chamber, is made of rose granite, which ranks a 7 or 8 on the Mohs scale. And these are precision monster 70-ton blocks. So let alone the problem of moving these blocks, how would the dynastic Egyptians have cut them and fashioned them with their softer, archaic tools? So even if these alleged discoveries turned out to be total nothing burgers, we cannot let that diminish our wonder of these incredible superstructures. Because while they may have been repurposed by the dynastics as tombs, I believe the geology and the science is already shouting at us, as Christopher Dunn and others have pointed out in their books and in their research, that these were something else originally. These were some kind of ancient energy devices. And that knowledge alone should blow our mind and make us want to do more research. Again, if this alleged discovery holds up, it will not only be the greatest discovery of our lifetime, but I believe it will confirm what I've been saying, what others have been shouting for years, that there is a hidden history they do not want us to know about.